The chamber was electric that morning. Cameras lined the walls, every microphone was hot, and the audience waited for fireworks. Congressman John Kennedy had barely settled into his seat when Maxine Waters leaned forward, her voice sharp and unyielding. She launched into a fiery monologue, accusing Kennedy of being out of touch, careless with policy, and blind to the struggles of everyday citizens. Her words echoed through the room, drawing gasps from some and nods of approval from others. She wasn't pulling punches, she wanted to embarrass him publicly. Kennedy, however, sat calmly. He didn't fidget, didn't raise his voice, didn't even glance at the cameras. Instead, he allowed her to finish, listening carefully, almost studying her every word. The silence after her final jab was thick, as if everyone expected him to explode in anger. Instead, Kennedy leaned into his microphone with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need theatrics. His voice was steady, controlled, and sharp as a scalpel. "Congresswoman," he began, "I appreciate your passion. But passion without facts is just noise." The room stirred. Kennedy then produced documents, reports, figures, and data, that dismantled her accusations one by one. Every point she had made, he countered with evidence, logic, and a calm delivery that made her earlier outrage seem almost theatrical. As he spoke, the audience shifted. The gasps turned into murmurs, the nods of agreement redirected toward him. Even some of her supporters began to glance at each other uncomfortably. Kennedy's rebuttal wasn't just a defense, it was a masterclass in composure and preparation. When he finished, he didn't gloat. He simply leaned back, folded his notes, and said, "The American people deserve solutions, not shouting matches." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the applause started, not from everyone, but from enough to fill the chamber with a thunderous echo. Cameras zoomed in on Maxine Waters, who sat stiffly, her earlier energy gone, her expression tight. That moment went viral within hours. Clips of Kennedy's calm takedown flooded social media, headlines ran wild, and the story dominated the news cycle. Commentators described it as one of the most decisive clapbacks in recent memory, a clash where outrage was met with facts, and outrage lost. Maxine Waters had attacked. But Kennedy's response reminded the nation that sometimes the most powerful counterpunch is calm, undeniable truth. Kennedy's words were still hanging in the air when the room shifted uneasily. Maxine Waters wasn't about to let the moment slip. She leaned forward again, her tone sharper this time, her eyes narrowed as if determined to claw back control. "You think your numbers tell the whole story," she snapped. "You hide behind charts and papers, but you don't see the people suffering in the streets. That's what makes you dangerous, Senator." The crowd murmured again, sensing her attempt to regain momentum. She raised her voice louder, practically booming over the microphone. "You represent arrogance, not answers. And the people deserve to know it." But Kennedy didn't flinch. He let the words roll past him as though they were gusts of wind. He slowly adjusted his glasses, looked at the papers in front of him, and then locked eyes with her. "Congresswoman," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than her shouting, "the difference between us is that I do see the people. I just refuse to exploit their pain for sound bites." That line hit like a thunderclap. The chamber froze. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards, already typing the quote that would make headlines. Even those who had cheered Waters' fiery attack moments earlier began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Kennedy wasn't just defending himself now, he was turning her attack into his advantage, exposing the spectacle for what it was. The tension in the chamber thickened. Cameras zoomed in on Maxine Waters as she leaned back, clearly rattled, but unwilling to concede. She forced a tight smile and fired again, her words dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, so now you're the savior of the people. Tell me, Senator, when was the last time you stepped foot into a neighborhood that wasn't polished and perfect? When was the last time you actually listened to the cries of real Americans?" Her tone was mocking, meant to sting. The audience stirred, unsure which way the exchange would swing. Kennedy slowly rose from his chair. The movement alone demanded silence. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. He spoke with the measured calm of a man who knew the truth was on his side. "Yesterday," he said simply. The room stilled. Maxine blinked, caught off guard. Kennedy then pulled out a photograph, one of him standing with factory workers just the day before, listening as they spoke about their struggles. "I don't need to stage outrage," he continued. "I spend my time where it matters. Not in front of cameras screaming, but with the people who put us here in the first place." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The cameras whipped back to Waters, her face stiffening as the applause started again, louder this time. Kennedy hadn't just answered her accusation, he had demolished it with proof. The applause echoed like a drumbeat, rolling across the chamber until it forced Maxine Waters to lean into her microphone again, her voice cutting through the noise. "Photographs don't prove commitment, Senator," she snapped, desperation creeping into her tone. "Anyone can pose for a picture and pretend to care. That's not leadership, that's theater." She straightened in her seat, raising her chin, trying to reclaim the authority slipping from her grasp. Her hands gestured wildly as she hammered the point. America doesn't need staged photo ops. It needs leaders with the courage to confront the truth. The crowd gave a hesitant cheer, trying to bolster her, but Kennedy was already shaking his head slowly. He didn't look angry, he looked almost disappointed. "Congresswoman," he replied evenly, "the difference between us is that when I visit those neighborhoods, I don't bring a camera crew." The chamber erupted. Reporters nearly fell over themselves to get the line down. Some in the audience gasped, others broke into applause so loud the chairman had to bang the gavel to restore order. Waters froze, her mouth opening slightly but no words coming out. The weight of Kennedy's calm, precise delivery crushed her earlier bravado. For the first time, the audience could see her struggling to find a response. Kennedy, meanwhile, simply returned to his seat, his silence making a louder statement than any shouted word ever could. The chairman's gavel finally restored a semblance of order, but the tension was now electric. Maxine Waters, visibly unsettled, leaned forward once more. Her voice rose with raw determination, trying to claw back the ground she had lost. "You sit there smug, Senator, acting like you're above it all," she declared, her tone sharp as glass. "But the truth is, you hide behind polite words while real families are drowning. You don't fight, you lecture. And the American people are tired of lectures." Her words cut through the chamber, drawing cheers from her die-hard supporters. The energy shifted slightly in her favor, the room buzzing again. Cameras zeroed in on her face, hungry for a comeback. Kennedy didn't move right away. He let her words echo, let the room simmer in the tension. Then, slowly, he stood. He placed his hand on the table, leaned into the microphone, and spoke in a tone so calm it demanded attention. "Congresswoman," he said, "if fighting for families means screaming without listening, then you're right, I don't fight like you. I fight by delivering results. Results that put food on tables and roofs over heads. Results that don't vanish the second the cameras are off." The room went silent, then exploded with applause that drowned out even the gavel. Journalists scribbled furiously, headlines writing themselves in real time. Maxine's expression tightened, her attempt at dominance had been flipped yet again. Kennedy hadn't just defended himself, he had redefined the entire debate. And the crowd knew it. The chamber buzzed with energy, reporters whispering frantically as cameras zoomed closer. Maxine Waters wasn't ready to surrender. She leaned forward, gripping the microphone with both hands, her voice sharp and biting. "Results?" she scoffed. "If your so-called results were real, Americans wouldn't be struggling the way they are. You parade around like some hero, but when the spotlight fades, you're nowhere to be found." Her words ricocheted across the hall, and for a moment, her supporters roared back to life, clapping and shouting in approval. She smirked, convinced she had turned the tide. But Kennedy only smiled faintly, a calm expression that contrasted her fury. He rose once again, his voice cutting through the noise with steady precision. "Congresswoman, the difference between us is simple," he said. "You make speeches. I make laws." The words detonated like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the chamber, followed by an eruption of cheers so loud the chairman's gavel was drowned out completely. Kennedy didn't bask in it. He simply adjusted his tie, looked toward the cameras, and added, "The American people don't need theatrics. They need leaders who work when the cameras are off." The crowd leapt to its feet. Journalists scrambled to file breaking alerts. The phrase, "You make speeches. I make laws," was already trending across social media before he even sat down. Waters froze, her face flushed, unable to mask the sting of his words. In that instant, the battle was over, and everyone knew who had won. Outside the chamber, the ripple effect was immediate. Within minutes, clips of Kennedy's line, "You make speeches. I make laws," were circulating online. News outlets cut into their regular programming to replay the moment on loop, commentators already calling it one of the sharpest exchanges in recent memory. On social media, the reaction was explosive. Hashtags with Kennedy's name shot to the top of trending lists, memes flooded timelines, and supporters hailed him as a master of composure under fire. Even those who weren't fans admitted he had delivered a knockout blow. Meanwhile, pundits rushed onto live broadcasts. Some tried to defend Waters, claiming her passion reflected the anger of the people. But others shook their heads, saying she had walked straight into Kennedy's trap, loud rhetoric versus quiet precision. Back in the chamber, Kennedy sat silently, hands folded, his face unreadable. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't smile. The contrast made him appear even more powerful, as if winning the moment had never been his goal. Waters, however, sat stiff in her chair, clearly rattled. She had come into the hearing prepared for a fight, but instead found herself starring in a clip that was already being replayed millions of times. The battle inside the room was over. But the war of public opinion had only just begun, and Kennedy was dominating it without saying another word. By evening, the clash had become the headline across nearly every major network. Anchors replayed the footage in slow motion, breaking down Kennedy's composure versus Waters' fiery delivery. Analysts on both sides dissected the moment, but the conclusion was nearly universal: Kennedy had turned the hearing into a stage and walked away the star. Clips flooded talk shows, late-night hosts joked about it, and social media platforms were ablaze. The phrase, "You make speeches. I make laws," was printed on t-shirts, trending hashtags, and even political cartoons by the next morning. Other politicians began weighing in. Some quietly praised Kennedy for his calm under pressure, while others tried to frame him as smug and dismissive. But the narrative had already taken hold. Kennedy's words weren't just a rebuttal, they were now a rallying cry. Reporters swarmed him in the halls of Congress, microphones shoved forward. "Senator Kennedy, did you plan that line?" one shouted. He paused, looked at the cameras, and with a faint smile said, "No. I just told the truth." That single sentence was clipped, shared, and replayed almost as much as the original confrontation. Meanwhile, Maxine Waters avoided reporters entirely. Her office released a short statement hours later, but it was buried under the avalanche of coverage glorifying Kennedy's viral moment. The balance of the political spotlight had shifted dramatically, and everyone knew it. The following morning, Kennedy's words dominated headlines nationwide. Editorials praised his poise, calling the exchange a defining moment in modern politics. Morning shows invited analysts to explain why his calm delivery resonated so strongly with the public. Kennedy himself stayed quiet, refusing to appear on the flood of programs requesting interviews. That silence only made him appear more disciplined, more statesmanlike. The restraint became part of his image, a leader who didn't need to chase cameras because the cameras chased him. Meanwhile, Maxine Waters was scrambling. Her team hurriedly booked her for primetime interviews, hoping to regain momentum. On one show, she attempted to downplay the viral moment, calling Kennedy's line a rehearsed stunt. But the host quickly played the clip again, pointing out his measured tone and the timing of his words. The audience laughed nervously, and the segment went viral for all the wrong reasons. Behind the scenes, staffers worried. The harder Waters pushed back, the worse the contrast appeared. Her passion, once a weapon, now seemed like noise against Kennedy's calm precision. Kennedy supporters seized the moment. Fundraising pages lit up, donations pouring in as the viral video became a campaign tool overnight. Comment sections filled with variations of the phrase, "We need more lawmakers, fewer loudspeakers." For Waters, it wasn't just a bad exchange, it was turning into a political nightmare. Kennedy's momentum snowballed faster than anyone predicted. By the end of the week, his office announced record-breaking donations, small contributions pouring in from across the country, fueled almost entirely by the viral clip. Political commentators called it a fundraising earthquake, the kind usually reserved for presidential hopefuls. National figures began chiming in. Governors, senators, and even former presidents praised Kennedy's composure. Editorial boards across the spectrum printed opinion pieces describing him as a rare politician who valued substance over spectacle. The phrase, "You make speeches, I make laws," had become a political anthem. Meanwhile, Maxine Waters was cornered. Her appearances on talk shows backfired, each attempt to discredit Kennedy only amplifying the original clip. When she accused him of grandstanding, fact-checkers countered with his long list of legislative achievements. When she claimed he hid behind numbers, footage of him meeting with workers and families replayed in response. Behind closed doors, her allies urged her to change the subject. "The more you fight this," one advisor warned, "the deeper the hole gets." But Waters refused to back down. She promised a fiery speech on the House floor, hoping to reclaim her image. Kennedy, however, didn't need to promise anything. He simply kept working, his silence speaking louder than her every attempt. And the nation kept watching, waiting for the next round in a battle that was reshaping the political landscape. The day of Maxine Waters' highly anticipated House floor speech arrived. The chamber was packed, cameras stationed at every angle, networks cutting in live as if history were about to be written. Waters entered with visible determination, clutching her stack of notes like a weapon. When she took the microphone, her voice was fiery, commanding. She spoke for nearly 20 minutes, attacking Kennedy directly, painting him as a politician who hid behind paperwork while real people suffered. She thundered about inequality, corruption, and what she called Kennedy's cold detachment. Her supporters cheered, standing to clap multiple times. But others shifted in their seats, the memory of Kennedy's composure still fresh. When she finally concluded with, "The American people deserve a fighter, not a figurehead," the applause echoed. For a moment, it seemed she might have regained ground. Then Kennedy rose. Slowly, deliberately. He didn't carry notes. He didn't even glance at the podium. He simply looked across the chamber, his tone steady as he began. "Congresswoman Waters is right about one thing, the American people do deserve a fighter. But they deserve a fighter who delivers results, not one who delivers sound bites." The room went silent. Kennedy continued, citing recent bipartisan bills he had authored, laws that had directly helped struggling families, veterans, and small businesses. With each example, the contrast sharpened, his work against her words. Finally, he ended with a single line, "America doesn't need louder voices. It needs stronger solutions." The chamber erupted. Applause thundered from both sides, drowning out the gavel. Networks cut to breaking coverage. The viral story had just gained a second chapter, and Kennedy once again owned it. The fallout from Kennedy's rebuttal was immediate. News outlets replayed the exchange all evening, framing it as a devastating encore to his earlier viral moment. Commentators marveled at how he had dismantled Waters without raising his voice, turning her fiery performance into a hollow spectacle. By morning, headlines blared across the country, "Kennedy does it again. Sound bites versus solutions." The calm that crushed the storm. His approval numbers spiked in overnight polls, and political analysts began openly speculating whether he had vaulted into national leadership territory. Waters, however, was under siege. Her allies privately urged her to change strategy, warning that each confrontation with Kennedy only magnified her weakness. Behind closed doors, frustration bubbled. One aide was overheard saying, "Every time she swings, he turns it into a spotlight for himself." The pressure wasn't just political, it was personal. Editorial boards in her own district questioned her tactics, while constituents flooded offices with calls, demanding to know why she kept losing the spotlight to Kennedy. Meanwhile, Kennedy remained steady. He refused interview requests, declined celebratory appearances, and instead quietly returned to committee work. The cameras still followed him, but he never chased them. That discipline only strengthened his image as a leader above the noise. And so, the narrative crystallized: Maxine Waters had the fury, but John Kennedy had the facts. And in the court of public opinion, facts were winning. Pressure on Maxine Waters finally boiled over. Within days of her second clash with Kennedy, whispers turned into open criticism. Senior members of her own party began distancing themselves, worried that her repeated defeats on camera were damaging not only her image but theirs as well. Editorials piled on. Phrases like outmatched, reckless, and ineffective started appearing in print beside her name. Some pundits even asked if she had inadvertently elevated Kennedy into a national figure with her relentless attacks. Inside her office, morale plummeted. Staffers debated whether to advise her to step back entirely, fearing another confrontation could end her career. But Waters, stubborn as ever, refused. "I don't retreat," she snapped during a closed-door meeting. "I'll fight him again." Meanwhile, Kennedy's star was rising higher than anyone expected. National organizations invited him to speak. Donors poured money into his war chest. Grassroots groups began adopting his viral lines as slogans, chanting them at rallies. Reporters swarmed Capitol Hill, framing Kennedy as a new power player whose influence extended far beyond his state. His approval ratings soared, and whispers of a larger political future grew louder by the day. The more Kennedy stayed disciplined and focused on policy, the more Waters' fiery outbursts looked desperate. Each attempt she made to claw back the spotlight only cemented the contrast: Kennedy the steady problem solver, Waters the angry voice shouting into the void. The stage was being set for a final confrontation, one that could decide not just reputations, but legacies. The final showdown came faster than anyone expected. A high-stakes committee hearing was scheduled, broadcast live across every major network. Both Kennedy and Waters were set to testify, and the media billed it as the ultimate rematch, the clash that would either redeem Waters or cement Kennedy's dominance. From the moment she entered the chamber, Waters radiated defiance. She slammed her notes on the table, glaring across at Kennedy as if daring him to look away. The cameras loved it. Commentators whispered that this was her last chance to shift the narrative. When her turn came, she unleashed a blistering speech. She called Kennedy out by name more than a dozen times, accusing him of dodging hard truths and hiding behind carefully rehearsed lines. Her voice rose to a near shout, echoing through the chamber as she declared, "The American people don't need calm words, they need leaders with courage." The crowd erupted in applause from her supporters. It felt, for a moment, like she had recaptured her fire. Then Kennedy stood. He didn't rush. He didn't shuffle papers. He simply straightened his jacket, walked to the microphone, and let the silence linger. "Congresswoman," he began softly, "courage isn't measured by how loudly you speak. It's measured by what you accomplish for the people who trusted you with their future." The words landed like a hammer. The room stilled. Kennedy then listed, one by one, the bipartisan bills he had shepherded through Congress, legislation that had delivered tangible results for working families, veterans, and small businesses. Finally, he looked directly into the cameras and said, "History doesn't remember speeches. It remembers solutions." The chamber erupted in thunderous applause, louder than any before. Even some of Waters' allies bowed their heads, realizing the battle was over. The aftermath of the final showdown was nothing short of seismic. Kennedy's words, "History doesn't remember speeches. It remembers solutions," were replayed on every major network, printed in bold headlines, and echoed across social media. Commentators declared it the line that ended the debate, the final blow in a rivalry that had captivated the nation. Within hours, Kennedy's approval ratings surged to unprecedented heights. Editorials hailed him as a statesman, praising his discipline and his ability to dismantle fury with facts. Fundraising totals shattered records yet again, and political analysts began openly speculating about higher office. To many Americans, Kennedy was no longer just a senator, he had become a national symbol of calm leadership in chaotic times. For Maxine Waters, the fallout was brutal. Her fiery performance, meant to redeem her, only highlighted the contrast with Kennedy's composure. Allies distanced themselves, critics sharpened their knives, and even supporters admitted privately that her repeated defeats had tarnished her reputation beyond repair. The viral narrative was clear: Kennedy had not only won the battles, he had won the war. In the days that followed, Kennedy didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He quietly returned to his work, letting the public and the press carry the story for him. That restraint only deepened his image as the man who didn't chase the spotlight but commanded it effortlessly when it found him. The rivalry had begun with an attack, but it ended with a lesson, a reminder that in politics, as in life, calm truth can silence even the loudest storm. And for John Kennedy, it wasn't just a victory. It was the moment that would define his legacy.